There we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm sure more people are going to be floating in here and logging in soon. I appreciate you joining us for the North American Association of Sales Engineers November Industry Insider session and forum. And today we have Peter Cohan as our guest and special speaker. And the title today is How Much Discovery is Enough? And Peter will really get into. I've read through and looked at his slide deck and the information that he's going to be presenting, and hopefully having an interactive dialogue here today. And I think that this topic is critical. Again, whether you're in software, SaaS, or not, it really doesn't matter. Any kind of technical product or service that you're trying to sell, obviously discovery is key. Now, it's easy to say discovery is key, and that's a part of your job as an SE or in pre-sales, but it's sort of harder to do and to do well. And I remember Peter a couple of months ago when we were starting to put this together, we were just saying, hey, would you like to do something with NAASE, with the association? Peter is a member of the association, so we certainly appreciate that as well. I asked Peter, well, give me Peter speaks all over the country and does a lot of trainings. I asked Peter, give me a few topics that you think might be relevant. And he did. He sent me a few. And this one stuck out to me because I think we've all sort of been through this, that did I do enough discovery? Did I do it well? Did I do too much? And one of the comments I made to Peter early on was, sometimes it feels like as an SE, it's hard to do that discovery without feeling like you're interrogating the prospect or the client or the company. And you don't, if you get to a point where it feels like that, like it's an interrogation or it's 20 questions, then obviously that's not going to go well, probably. And so I remember that happened to me about 5-6 years ago, and I sure it happened more than once probably, and kind of reassess that it has to be part of a dialogue and not something else. On that, and I'm going to just speak for 1 minute about the association. I'm sure most of you have all been on our website. If you're not a member, please consider joining. It is, pretty inexpensive, $99 a year, I believe, for the annual dues. And we do different things. Usually every month or two, we'll do a Zoom forum. We have several benefits and discounts available. If you look on our join page, you'll see some of that. And lastly, you do have an opportunity to become a certified sales engineer, CSE, through the association if you're qualified. So with that said, I will turn it over to Peter Cohan, and we'll go from there. Peter.
All right, gentlemen and ladies, can you tell you what? Open up your chat dialog box, would please. And by the way, Ken, I'm going to be working with Ken as an active participant. So hopefully this will be fun for everyone. But open up your chat dialog box. Let me know if you see my mouse in the upper left-hand corner. Type top left or mouse or rodent or something like that. Make sure it's working. Ken, you can see it? Okay, thanks, gentlemen and ladies. Wiggle, thanks, Josh. Bottom right, you can write BR or I don't know, whatever you want. There we go. All right, perfect. So let's dive in. So how much discovery is enough, or perhaps too lower wiggle, too much? So I want to start off, as I often do, by offering a few numbers. So any ideas what these three numbers might represent? And Ken, you're welcome to participate because I don't think you've seen this version of the presentation. So anyone, any guesses? Let's see. All right. Well, the 8 greater than 8B, that would be 8 billion people in the world today, of which 0% are identical. And just, I can't help but do this stuff because my background is chemistry, biochemistry, but it turns out that 50% of our genome, 50% is shared with plants. So half of us are basically chlorophyll beasts. I mean, what can you say? But what am I really trying to say here? If we have 8 billion people in the world and 0% are identical, would one expect that a single discovery process should be applicable to all 8 billion people? Everybody type no with passion in your chat dialog box. Let's see or an NWP, if you would. There you go. Thank you, Kelly. All right, some discovery numbers. So what you're looking at here are 3 more sets of numbers, and I'll just tell you what they are. This is the amount of discovery that I will typically do, and my team does, when preparing for a typical great demo or doing discovery workshop. So 2 to 4 hours of actual discovery conversation with one or more parties, 3 to 6 demos or discovery conversations provided to us as recordings, what we'll review. So in other words, we want to take a look at the patient and see this specific patient, how are they operate, how are they working? And that results in on the order of 8 to 15 typewritten pages of discovery notes. And for those of you who remember this ancient technology, does anybody remember what this is called here? And Ken, you can unmute and chime in if you like. What are we looking at here? That's right,
A Word doc?
papers. Word doc, yeah, but printed out as paper. This is what I used to do back in the dark ages and take these notes with me. But that's a typical amount of preparation that I thought was reasonable to be able to deliver 1 to 2 days of training workshop on doing discovery or demo methodology. So that's designed here to set the stage, but let's do something different here a little bit. So Ken, I'm going to need you to unmute here and be my partner here for this, if you would, please. So
Okay.
this was a discovery conversation I was having with a VP of sales not too long ago, about 3 years ago or so. And I said, so tell me, please, what percent of your team do you feel does a good job of discovery? And he says, that's your
About
line.
20%.
And I thought for a moment and I said, what? I didn't realize I actually said here. I said, what percent of your team thinks they do a good job of discovery, but you know they really don't? And he says,
Hang on, let me close the door.
and I hear this ka-chunk sound, and then he returns and he says, after taking a swig of something,
About 80%.
80%. And I laughed, and then I thought, ouch, this is the core of the problem. So let's take a look at some, if you will, dimensions of discovery. And as we go through this, we're going to be reviewing 3 simple discovery objectives, which I'll just share with you. Number 1, we want to get what we need to be able to propose a precise solution. Number 2, we need to satisfy our prospect's desire to feel that we really understand their situation sufficiently. This is hugely important. And number 3, as Ken mentioned, we want to try to avoid what is often felt as an interrogation. And curiosity question, does anybody recognize the image on the right? If you do, type it in your chat dialog box. If you don't, I'm sorry, I can't help. Let's see if anybody does. Ken, do you? No. Okay, fine. I'll give you a hint. It's Monty Python with this clip that was exact. Thank you, Josh. No one was expecting the Spanish Inquisition. Anyway, let's dive in. Here's what we're going to cover. It's a lot. We may not get through all of this, but that is okay. So let's just dive in here. Let's talk about qualification versus discovery. And sadly, there are many people and many organizations that equate the two as one, and that is incorrect. So let's take a look at this. Ken suddenly says, I'm really interested in learning about this new arena that I've come across. So he goes online, finds a vendor, and clicks the mighty book a demo button. And everybody, what happens next? Type it in your chat dialog box, or Ken, you can say, or you can unmute if you want. What happens next? Well, I'll tell you, you get a qualification call from an SDR, BDR, junior level salesperson, who in many cases goes through, Damien, asks for data and creates a lead, and then also goes through a qualification exercise, which is designed to ensure that the sales team is only spending time with prospects that are truly meaningful. That's a qualification. So they say, so do you have budget allocated? And maybe you do, maybe you don't. They ask, are you the person in charge, or are you a member of the key members of the buying committee? They ask, do you have a defined set of needs? And finally, do you have a concrete timeline by when, if you will, you need to have a solution in place? So all of these questions are designed to help the vendor decide whether or not to invest time with this prospect. And if you answer correctly, then you get to set another meeting, which is kind of an interesting thing in terms of what you, the prospect, get out of this. A meeting with a salesperson or a pre-sales person and a salesperson. On the other hand, if you fail to meet their figures of merit of any of those 4 other parameters, what happens? you get qualified out and the call is terminated. And here's a frightening thing. If you had clicked the book a demo button, what did you not get to see? Everybody type it in your chat dialog box. That's right, a demo. So here's an interesting thing. Well, we'll come back to that. So question four, this is rhetorical. Why is qualification alone insufficient as far as, well, both vendor, frankly, and the prospect? And the answers are pretty simple. Qualification is all about assessing whether or not the prospect is worthy of further attention from the sales team. It's all about putting boundaries, if you will, around certain parameters. Discovery, on the other hand, is a process of trying to gain a sufficient understanding of a prospect situation and it goes way beyond, if you will, qualification. So a simple way of looking at this, and thanks, Kelly, by the way, qualification is done for the benefit of the vendor only, whereas discovery should be perceived as being done for both parties. And that's important because if the prospect feels that you're just getting information that you need and there's nothing in return for the prospect, that's when it begins to feel like it's an inquisition or interrogation. So how you ask questions, how you respond to questions, all contribute to whether or not this is going to feel like an interrogation or a conversation. Qualification should be viewed as a subset and a teeny tiny subset of overall discovery. So with respect to discovery objectives, the three that we mentioned earlier, with respect to qualification, well, did you get what you need? Not really. You don't have sufficient information to propose a solution. How about the prospect? Did they see their demo? Nope. if they get qualified out. Did you avoid an interrogation? And I tried to make this a maybe because, well, it was a maybe. All that took place was a set of questions with nothing in return for the prospect. So qualification is not the same as discovery. And I really want people to begin to understand that. Let's take a look at, continue that whole process and take a look at the parameters of people who are just browsing what they want and what they need versus people who are in an active buying process. So Ken, unmute for a second. How often have you ever just decided to go out and explore tools or technologies, but you didn't have any plans to buy anything? You just wanted to begin to get an understanding and education. How often does that take place for you?
It takes place fairly often. I'd say it takes place almost every week, probably, or every other week.
There you go. And guess what, folks? It turns out that, well, you all can read. That's right. So 50% of the folks that are qualifiable are often in the mode that Ken was. I'm just interested in gaining understanding, maybe plans for next year, etc. So here's the frightening thing that happens. Let me grab my mouse. All of these leads, let's choose a pen. Actually, what pen color would you all like? Ken, do you have a choice? What pen color would you like, sir?
Let's go with blue.
Blue. Whoops, nice choice.
Good choice.
Excellent.
Good choice.
There you go.
That's our logo color.
That is your logo color. So we've got leads coming in here. Those that get qualified actually enter the funnel. But what happens to those that, if you will, spill over and are disqualified? Well, Ken, if you had clicked a book a demo button and found that you were disqualified and never saw a demo from that vendor, how would you feel?
I feel like I was slighted a little bit, but I think sometimes I might go into a database of illegitimate potential buyers, and I might then get onto their email blast list or some tickler list, from automated marketing or something like that.
Right. Well, you'll get nurtured by their marketing organization. But you said something key, and you were sort of annoyed. So what would be the likelihood you would return to that vendor if there were 3 or 4 or 5 other vendors that treated you better?
Yeah, I would probably go with people that treated me better.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you become, and this is an interesting concept, you become a lead that churns even before you've entered the sales funnel, because you're going somewhere else. And it turns out that lead churn, which is something I invented as a term, is much bigger than people realize, because they're not tracking on this, very frankly. So the question then becomes, well, how do you re-engage somebody? How engage somebody that otherwise gets qualified out? And bear in mind that, as this says, 50% of the folks that hit the surface of that funnel may not be qualified to buy right now, but may be interested in buying next year. That's pipelines, what we're really talking about. And one way to think about this is the classic water cycle, wherein you've got rain falling down on mountains. It goes and runs off, and it turns into surface groundwater, and then evaporates. And what we want is that rain to return to our mountains, if you will, as opposed to going off to somebody else's mountains somewhere else. So one way to do that is, and I call this the cloud above the funnel, is to find a way to recycle these leads rather than let them churn. And one of the strongest ways to do this is to provide the person that requests a demo with what is known as a vision generation demo. And as it shows here, it is an appetizer. It's just enough to satisfy this person's interest. Provide them with something tasty, just substantial enough that they say, ooh, that was really yummy. I will come back again later. And a vision generation demo has two components. Number one, you're using an example success story that is designed to try to align with the prospect's job title and industry. And then one or two or three example screens that are deliverables that this person might be interested in. So we're going to take a simple example of that. Ken, let's say that you are a VP of sales and a mid-sized software organization, and you'd reached out to us and said, hey, I'm interested in taking a look at how to improve my, well, he didn't tell us anything. He just clicked the book a demo button. Mm-hmm. And I did a little bit of research, and I said, oh, he's a VP of sales. So what I'm showing here is known as a great demo situation slide. And it's a beautiful starting point. Where's E? It's a beautiful starting point. So I say, Ken, you click the button to see a demo. Before we dive into a long, painful harbor overview demo, let me share with you how we've helped some other folks that might be similar to your situation. So what I noted is that you're a VP of sales, a mid-sized software company. What we've seen from other very similar folks is that they are under, as heads of sales, pressure to either exceed or at least achieve their quarterly and annual revenues. And with respect to forecasting, which is what our software does, improves, people said they're using multiple Excel spreadsheets and email often. They said it takes freaking forever to roll up the forecast. It gets worse as you go to the end of the quarters. Often people have to go to IT for help. And the sales team is spending way too much time with the process as opposed to, if you will, doing sales. What we heard these people say they wanted is they wanted rapid access to the current numbers and status. They wanted improved visibility. They wanted the ability to inspect key opportunities. They wanted insights into individual reps' opportunities. Well, we provided these capabilities. And what we hear from our customers now is that on average, to similar sized organizations, they've been able to generate 2 million or more in incremental revenues, and they've been able to redeploy 2.5 full-time equivalents to other more valuable tasks. Ken, how does this compare with your situation?
That sounds just like what we're doing, Peter.
It's very similar? Okay, perfect. Would you like an example or two how we've helped these organizations in terms of what the software looks like?
That would be great.
Okay, cool. What you're looking at here is one of the main dashboards that people said were most valuable. So in addition to the, if you will, boring indicator here of where you are against forecast, you can see exactly where people are in terms of some of the sales stages. Further, there's a breakdown here in terms of each of your reps aligned with the actual activities and how much time they're spending. So immediately you can see that Eli here needs help, whereas with Cindy is really, really doing well. And similarly, you can see the pipeline down here, but mapped out exactly the same way. You can see the negotiation stages, et cetera, et cetera. So you are able to coach these people in alignment with their specific needs. And doing so enabled some of our other customers, as I said, to generate 2 million or more in incremental revenue and redeploy 2.5 or more full-time equivalents to other more valuable tasks. Ken, what do you think about this kind of deliverable for your situation?
That looks like it might work. Does it
Oh,
does it interface with Salesforce?
okay, perfect. And ladies and gentlemen, what has just happened? What has just happened? We are now in a conversation.
Yes.
Now, two possible exit points. Number one, if he's in an active buying process, I would say, there's a lot more here to discuss, and I have a lot of questions I need to ask you about your situation. Can we invest the next 20 minutes? And by the way, how long did this take? It took about 4 minutes. It took about 4 minutes to execute. Vision generation demo, the situation slide, one or two or three compelling, meaningful visuals. This enables the prospect to say, oh, I'm aligned and I'm interested. And if so, if I'm in an active buying process, we move forward into a discovery conversation. Conversely, if he says, this is really interesting, but it's really still too early for me, I say, wonderful. While we're together on the line, is there anything else you'd like to ask in addition to whether or not it integrates with Salesforce? And I'm just going to say yes. And we would have whatever additional conversation we might have. And then I would say, let's plan to back together when you have greater interest or you reach that point where you'd really like to pursue this further. And then we add them to the trickle marketing list or the nurture marketing list. What's different here is what? We have, I have to highlight this in a moment, we have satisfied his desire to see the beginnings of a demo. He didn't get the full demo and probably doesn't want it, but he's gotten just enough, that appetizer, to say, aha, this looks interesting, I'll come back later. For those of you who want more details on this vision generation demo process, I strongly recommend you get a copy of this book, read chapter 11. I know the author, by the way, pretty well. And this is where it's detailed. So Lewis, I'm going to come back to your question in a bit because it's going to take me too long to read it. But as we have time, we'll come back to these things. So just browsing prospects, discovery objectives, we did get what we needed. They got, or in this case, Ken got what he needed. And I would say we managed to avoid an interrogation. So with that, let's dive on. Let's talk about buying tools versus buying complex offerings. So what's a tool? A tool is lower cost, it's a simple buying process, no committee. When I was a president of a business unit at a company called Symix 100 years ago, a bunch of the engineers came to me and said, we need, what was it? I think it was, we need a dozen copies of SolidWorks. And I said, being a chemist, I said, great, what's SolidWorks? And for the engineers out there, you're all shaking your heads. But I said, what's that? And more specifically, I said, what do you need in terms of, what version, what are there options that I should be aware of, et cetera, et cetera. And then I raised a PO and we purchased 12 copies. That's buying tools, okay? Solutions, or if you will, complex offerings, are typically going to be higher cost. It's a more complex buying process. And in many cases, there's a committee involved. So whereas buying tools could be a straight line approach, buying solutions can be a convoluted, challenging process. So when you're doing discovery, you need to be thinking, first of all, in terms of two parameters. Number one, what's the buyer's experience? And number two, what's the relative complexity of the product? So on the bottom left here, you've got people who are inexperienced with buying tools. You've got low complexity, but inexperienced. Then you've got experienced people buying tools, which is where I was at Symix. I knew how to do it. I knew how to get it through the organization. I knew what to ask. And all I really needed was well, we'll get to them in a moment. Some simple information. As you move to the right, though, things get much more complex. And in fact, this bottom right quadrant here, inexperienced buyers with complex offerings, this is who needs the greatest help and probably the deepest discovery, although not much different, frankly, from experienced buyers. Basic difference is experienced buyers know the process. They know their internals. They know what they need to do. And to a certain degree, they're often looking for not guidance, but proactive help from you, which we'll take a look at in a moment. So curiosity, if you guys would answer in your chat dialog box, how many of you purchase tools, purchase complex situations as the buyer? How many of you have ever been a buying committee member? How many of you have ever been a champion? How many of you have even just been involved? Hopefully some of you have been involved. Ken, curiosity question, where do you align on this list?
Yeah, certainly I would say for myself, almost all of this list. I've been part of that, certainly part of an overall buying team or on a committee of purchasing. Champion, maybe not as much. I'm more of the cynic probably in the procurement angle, but
we need a new
yeah.
category.
Yeah, right. Add cynic.
Anti-champion.
Yeah, right.
So this is here's the frightening, and I don't know if it's a statistic yet, but the frightening thought is that the majority of sales teams, salespeople and pre-sales people, have never been purchasers of complex solutions. They've never actually been through a buying process. At maximum, some of them have been people who were polled for their opinions. That's typical. So something to keep in mind. If you are inexperienced in buying, something I might actually recommend is participate. Find a way to become an active member of a buying committee, even if you're just providing opinion, but so you can see the mechanics and understand what goes on with that. So when you look
Hey,
at
Peter,
yeah.
one quick thing just on that note, it's interesting. So in my previous life, I did a lot of purchasing and buying, and so I do understand sort of that side of it. But on that note, NAASE just published a new blog article a few days ago talking about what does the B2B process look, what is important on the procurement side. And we kind of went down that. Again, that's not what this is about today, but so certainly take a look out for that on the NAASE site if you'd like.
There you go. So once again, and thank you for that. So looking at buyer experience on the left versus a vertical axis versus product complexity, you have a similar kind of a challenge. You've got people who are inexperienced and they need not just the order information, what do I put in the PO, but they may need guidance on for tools. How do I raise a PO? What else is needed? Is this something that I need to get managerial approval for? Does it hire? Is it something I can pay for with a credit card? The experienced folks, which is where I was at CIMIX, I just need to know what do I need to put on the PO so I do it right the first time. When you're looking at complex products and inexperienced people, they need two sets of help. They need guidance through a convoluted, complex buying process in many cases by experienced sales teams. And they need full discovery. They need to understand that they're doing the right thing. They need to make sure that all their bases are covered, if you will. The only difference between them and the experienced folks with complex sales and complex buying processes is the experienced people don't need guidance. They want help, but they don't need guidance. So once again, here, when we're talking about tools versus complex offerings, we got what we need. We're able to satisfy our prospect and we're avoiding interrogations based on understanding those different 4 quad parameters. Let's take a look at champion experience. This is the same thing. And Ken, thanks for offering that because it's exactly the same situation. You've got people who are inexperienced as champions, and champions have specific roles. They're driving the purpose. They're driving the purchase. In some cases, they're just buying it for their team. That's the tool side here on the left. But if they're dealing with complex offerings, they may need to be selling internally. They may need to be putting together cost justifications. They may need to be handling objections internally and more. So when you look at the champion space, same thing. Inexperienced for tools, they need a little bit of guidance. They probably need some brief discovery to make sure that they're going to get what they need. Experienced people have already done that work. They just want order info. And as you get complex, they need a lot of help, guidance, full discovery. And again, the experienced people need full discovery to be effective champions. This is a terrific book by a colleague, Garen Hess, called Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder, and it's all about something called buyer enablement. And if you were to make a quick definition, buyer enablement is all about anticipating and proactively addressing buyer wants and needs before they become necessary. So we're going to do a few examples of that. For champion enablement, You may need to provide them, a champion, with the tools like vision generation demo tools and other internal selling tools to be able to market and sell internally, convince other committee members and so forth. That often includes success stories and references. You may need to help them with internal objections, provide them with value analyses, or help them stand them up, metrics, value realization events. And how do you know whether or not your champion is experienced? Well, here's a simple way to do it. Ask them, what's your level of being experience of being a champion? How often have you done it? Was it complex? Was it not, etc.? And bear in mind that not just champions are involved. There's the buying committee that needs to be thought of in terms of how do we enable all these other players? And there may be other departments that are involved. In fact, there typically will be. Same question, how do we enable all these other groups? We're going to revisit that in one moment. But again, what we're looking to do is to get what we need, satisfy our prospects, and avoid an interrogation. So when we look at the buyer experience space, and this is just a variation on the same, it's a broader version of champion experience. Same kind of ideas. So the two right-hand sides of things are where things, the two right-hand quadrants are where things get difficult. So what do we need to help or do to help? Guidance for those on the left bottom, order info, and some increasing amount of discovery, if you will, for people that experience to make sure they know what they're getting. But as you move to the right, man, they're going to need a lot of help. And again, I want to reference buyer enablement, because the more you can proact and think in terms of, oh, we're going to need to execute a mutual NDA before we go forward with discovery. So let's get that started right in that first discovery call, for example, or even before the first discovery call. If there's going to be data and privacy surveys, let's get those started right away for the same type of rationale. If legal is going to be several months in processing, let's get those started. These are the kinds of things that can, if you will, help you speed your prospects' buying process. And again, one way to help to find out how much help they need is simply to ask the question, what's your level of buying experience? Do it gently, but firmly. All right, I love this graph. I just built this a little while ago. If we look at the level of anxiety on the left here, or vertical, versus the time on the x-axis, and we look at the seller's anxiety starts off around here, and it drops down as they recognize they've got a real qualified prospect. Here we're going through discovery, some demos, maybe some back and forth. And as the prospect says, yeah, okay, I'll let you know when we're ready, all sellers go into this horrible area of, they're ghosting me, I'm not hearing anything. All right, that's the seller's perspective. Buyer's perspective is actually rather similar. The very beginning, they're concerned about, are there solutions available? Is it something I can afford? I don't want to talk to the salesperson because once I do, they're going to ask me all kinds of questions. But once you're in the process, it feels fairly comfortable. However, both parties actually enter an area known as risk. And a risk for the buyer are questions in the buyer's mind, such as, is there a better product out there that I don't know about? Am I really getting the best price? Is this really the best time? Or if I wait, will there be something better? This is known as risk in some sales methodologies. And it can take some energy to get through that. There's all kinds of books and sales methodologies that will tell you how to do that. But I do want to call this out because this is one of the reasons that people will ghost you for a period of time. They're chewing. They're trying to decide. It's like we all do. Gee, I've decided I want this new car, but oh no, they're going to have a 2024 model coming out, and ooh. Now, here's the but wait, there's more. What happens after the purchase? Does the risk for the buyer go down, stay the same, or go up? Ken, what do you think?
I think it goes up.
You are correct, sir. And why?
Because you just you cut the purchase order, or wired funds or cut the check or whatever. Now you, especially if you're the champion, let's say, but even if you're not, if you're part of that committee, that buying committee, you have to implement it, and you have to prove that this is going to do what the seller says that it can.
As promised. Yeah,
Yes.
you have the weight of those several $100,000 of investment
Right.
descending heavily onto your shoulders.
Right.
That weight and that anxiety is released when value realization events are achieved. So, what's a value realization event? Let's do this really rapidly. Um, Traditional sales process, implementation process. So, here about is where the contract is executed. Here are all the steps that might take place. Traditional salespeople are invested in this process up through the contract signature and the PO received, and do not get in their way as they rush towards their next opportunity. Good sales teams pursue this process up through go live, but truly exceptional, great sales teams follow the process and, in fact, precipitate the process through what are known as value realization events. These are small but significant wins for the now customer. One turn of the successful crank, one opportunity of doing something you never could do before, or you could do it faster, better, cheaper, whatsoever. So in discovery, we teach people to discuss and uncover one or more value realization events that you and the team, your team, as well as their team, can map towards as you go through implementation and rollout and customer success. So for those who want this presentation, I'd be happy. Send me an email afterwards. I'll give you the email address as we get to the end. But here's some examples of some value realization candidates. In interest in time, let's dive on forward here. So with respect to buyer experience, this is how you begin to map to what you need to get, what your prospect needs, and avoiding interrogation again. Let's talk about executives. Ken, hallmarks of executives. What would you say? 3 or 4 words that would define an executive.
They don't have much time, slash, they might be a little impatient. They have a lot of weight and pressures on their shoulders. Those would be 2, and those are people that are willing and able to make decisions.
Absolutely. And so that's perfect, by the way. So when an executive reaches out to a vendor, they will often describe the tip of the iceberg in terms of the problem. They'll identify it as important because it is important to them. However, you and they both know there's a lot under the surface. And so you cannot ask an executive for all this detail. As Ken pointed out, they're not going to suffer that. It's just not going to happen. So what you need to do and what they need to do is known as delegating you down. So Paul Smith, the CEO here, is going to delegate you down to the CFO, Linda Jones, to talk to Julio Sanchez, the controller, to get details on X, Y, and Z. The VP of sales, Scott Burns, and Sarah, for example, need to be spoken to, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're working with executives, expect and desire, ask to be delegated down. You want to provide them with vision generation demos so that they are able to see that this is going to satisfy their needs crisply. You want to provide them with the success stories and references. You want to do brief discovery so they feel that you understand enough before they delegate you down. They may need guidance through the process depending on how experienced they are. Oopsie, and you need a mutual action plan, which includes reporting back to the executive what you learned from each of the folks you've been delegated down to. So you're going to get what you need, be able to satisfy your prospect, and avoid an interrogation. So let's see, let's dive on here. This is a fun one. Ken, are you still with me here? Yep, okay. Medical analogy. So fundamental principle for complex solutions, this is non-obvious. People
Peter,
initially appear to be
you're
reticent, but I'll give you an
I think,
example.
Peter,
Yeah.
your Wi-Fi or internet might be kind of coming in and out a little bit. I kind of
Okay.
missed
Is it better? Is it better now?
a little bit. Yeah, try that.
Okay. Sorry about that. There's a lot of storms going around. Okay. For complex solutions, buyers actually want to be discovered. And so if you have simply scraped your knee, would you want a doctor to ask?
Having audio
Am I
problems.
still here with you?
Problems with you. Yeah, now you're back.
Uh-oh.
Sorry. Weird. Try again.
Are we
Sorry.
there?
Yeah, I hear you. I can see the screen good.
Ken, still there? Maybe I should.
Yeah. Why don't
Okay.
you try to
All
speak?
right. So difference between a scrape on the knee and an operation. Would you want the doctor?
So, hey, Peter, you're muted, and yeah, you're just going to try to reboot there.
There we go. Let's try it. Sorry about that. So there we go. Are we back?
I'm waiting to see your screen. Hold on a second.
Can we back?
I don't see your screen yet. I'm sorry, everyone. Just hold on one second. Like I said, whoever would like this presentation from Peter can
My
reach out to
apologies,
us.
folks. Let
Yeah,
us try.
we're trying here.
Uh,
While he's pulling that up, Peter, if I could mention a couple of comments here to folks that folks wrote in. Mary mentioned, I've always wondered about the dissatisfaction from our prospects based on disqualification practices. How are you gathering data about how they feel? It's something I totally agree with you on. Obviously, that's what you mentioned early on in your presentation. Any thoughts on that, Peter?
I missed that because I
Oh,
was changing networks here because of some. I
okay.
have no idea what's going on. My apologies on that.
All right.
Let's
Why don't we
dive. Let's.
let's let you go? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully this is more stable. So
Okay.
where I was trying to go with this very simply. If you're going to go undergo an operation, you want your doctors to thoroughly do diagnosis. So that's part of the whole concept of that. So how much discovery is enough? And let's just do a little mini vignette. And Ken, let's say that you have had what you think is the flu for the past 9 days,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not getting any better. So you go to hospital number one, doctor number one, you present and you say to her, I think I have the flu. So go ahead and do that.
All right. I think I have the flu.
And doctor number one says, yeah, everybody's got it. It's going around. And she writes a prescription. And let me
Yeah.
hand you a prescription here. She writes a prescription. Go ahead and grab that.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
For a new experimental flu med called Fluvigon, and
Okay.
says start taking it. You should start feeling better in about a day and a half. So now, two questions. Number one, how did you feel about that interaction? Number two, would you buy that prescription and start taking those pills?
Probably not, because she didn't really validate anything I was saying, or
Okay.
didn't probe, I guess, or check.
Yeah, she didn't diagnose.
Right.
So Ken's uncomfortable. He goes across town to hospital number two. Doctor number two presents and says exactly the same thing, and I'll be doctor number two. Go ahead.
I think I have the flu, doc.
Well, it's been going around. How long have you had it?
About 9 days.
9 days. Running a temperature?
I think so, but I don't have a thermometer at home.
Okay. Do you feel warm?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Any sweats?
A bit. Yes.
Aches and pains?
Yes. Very much.
Any nausea?
Yes. A little bit.
Okay. And we go on for another 8 doctor minutes, which is a long time if you've ever sat in an examination room.
Right.
At the end of which, doctor number two prescribes exactly the same medication. So,
Mm-hmm.
same two questions, Ken. How'd you feel about the interaction, and would you start taking those pills?
My interaction was good, and I think I would start taking the pills.
So this is hugely important. Both doctors came to the same, or prescribed, if you will, the same solution, but were much more comfortable with doctor number two because she did a diagnosis. She performed sufficient discovery so that Ken felt comfortable moving forward with the solution that she proposed. So everything else being, well, here's what it comes down to. How much discovery is enough? When the vendor has sufficient information to confidently and clearly propose a precise solution, and when your prospect believes that you as a vendor do have enough information. So you just do discovery for both parties. So I hope that that helps. How much discovery information is required to be able to get to that point? I would say at minimum is probably a great demo situation slide, which contains the key attributes or key elements of information to enable you to move forward with a sales process, to enable you to move forward with a demo, and in fact, to be able to take the same information from sales and pre-sales throughout the organization. What's the maximum? There is no maximum. When I was preparing for workshops, as I said, it might be 8 to 15 pages. It could be several hours, numerous hours of work actually going through this and understanding our prospect situation, our customer situation. So going back to the situation slide for a moment, this is a delightful way of capturing and recommunicating the key elements of discovery information that are needed throughout the organization. They are, in fact, the crisp currency of discovery information, discovery communication. So between sales and pre-sales, to professional services and implementation, to customer success, and even up to marketing and into development, a great demo situation slide enables you to have a standard currency for communicating that information. All right, we've got just a few more minutes. I'm going to introduce the doing discovery methodology. This is outlined in this fabulous book. I know the author. And I just want to highlight a couple of important ideas on this. About you, the opening should be all about the prospect. And a question I'd love to ask before I get into a real session is, tell me, before we dive in, how did you ascend to this position of power and authority at whatever the company is? And the delightful thing about it is the prospect begins to talk because people are most comfortable talking about themselves. Demographics, demographics, this is what you need and they need both to be able to understand on the sales side, what is the licensing going to look like? But on the prospect side, the information we need to be able to generate accurate and compelling value analyses and ROI analyses. Major pain, this is all about the pain section. And I want to emphasize we need to quantify, we need to identify the specific capabilities that the prospect is looking for, and we may need to be prepared to re-engineer vision. And what that really means is that a prospect may not know everything that is possible. You want to introduce capabilities that you think would be relevant to them, but not in the form of a demo necessarily, in the form of a question. And we teach the idea of a biased question to do that. I want to identify one additional area, which is culture. Culture is something that is rarely looked at in traditional qualification and old school discovery processes, but it has to do with things like, well, where are you in the technology adoption curve? Have you ever been a burn victim? How do you perceive yourself as an organization? With respect to implementation, do you do it carefully and in waves, or you do it as a single rollout? So that's something I do want to urge people to take a look at. I'm going to skip some of the stuff that we had queued up in case we had enough time, but I do want to point out for the team here that everything else being equal, the vendor that is perceived by the prospect as doing a superior job in discovery is in a competitively advantageous position. This is non-obvious, but very, very important. One or two other things, and then we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to skip this stuff. I do want to identify this stuff. So I want you, and not necessarily in this session, but on your own, to do a personal assessment of your discovery skills. And at level 1, you're simply uncovering statements of pain. I have a problem, says the prospect. Number 2, you're learning more about that pain. Oh, you say, tell me more about it. What's going on? Tell me about your workflows. Tell me about your processes. Level 3, you're understanding or seeking to understand, well, what happens when this bad thing occurs? Who else is involved? What happens upstream and downstream or sideways? What are the errors caused? Well, how many rework do you have to do? Level 4 is where most people drop out, and that's actually getting quantified elements of value associated with these challenges. So when errors occur, well, how long does that delay take? Oh, it takes 2 days each time we have an error. Oh, well, how often do you have errors? We have 2 or 3 errors every week. You add that up, you suddenly have 6 to 8 hours every week. Well, that begins to be an interesting number. Quantifying is something that people need to do in discovery. Re-engineering vision, as I said, this is helping the prospect understand what else might be possible that's important to them that they are unaware of. Level 6 is learning how to apply discovery skills across a fairly broad range of prospect dimensions. So I've listed some here. We talked a little bit about some of these dimensions in terms of various experience levels. And then level 7 is really aligning everything into a cohesive discovery methodology. Well, what do I mean by discovery methodology? And I'm going to jump ahead to that. And that is, I'm jumping way ahead. Methodology teaches you 3 things. Number 1, why you would do something in a certain way, as opposed to just a pile of skills. What should be done, how to do it, and when it should be done. And if you look at building a house as an example of methodology, imagine what would happen if somebody tried to build a house by putting the roof on first, for example, before anything else was in place. Or they poured the foundation, they let it sit, and then they realized, oh no, we should have put in plumbing and electrical. So it teaches you all 4 of these elements. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this takes us to the end of the formal presentation. Ken, questions or other topics that we want to raise?
Yeah, there was a couple of comments and questions, so I want to get to that. Anyone else has any thoughts, you can put them in chat, or you can unmute yourself. That's fine. And this is my question before I get to a couple of the others. And I've dealt with this from the purchaser side, from the procurement team side, and that buyer side too. And I think that's, and then also from the sales side and the sales engineer side, I think a giveaway sometimes, let's say you're going into a situation where you're the potential new vendor and there's an incumbent, company, software or solution provider there. Sometimes in sales, I've come to this scenario where I'm trying to unseat this incumbent, and the prospect or the company, they are very tight-lipped, and it's very tough to get any answers or details out of them as I'm trying to go through this discovery process. Even though they have been qualified, they are qualified, but it's almost like they don't want to, they're playing it very tight to the vest, and they just want, what is our number? What's our quote? They want to see a written proposal. And it just seems like they are just trying to, price check us, or versus say a service provider that they've been doing business with for 10 years or whatever. So
right,
what do you think of that? Or is that pretty common, or is that like
it's
a
very
telltale
common.
sign? Yeah,
It's very common. If they're looking for you, from what you've described,
yeah,
it sounds like they're looking for you to be able to provide a price so they have negotiation leverage with their incumbent vendor.
right,
If they're not willing to open up to discovery conversations, then they're comfortable with their incumbent vendor. What you just described is one of the reasons why there are so many no decision outcomes that people suffer from. In other words, something that just doesn't close, it just rolls over from quarter to quarter to quarter. It goes on a forecast because they're qualified and
right.
they reached out to you, but they're not really interested in buying from you. There's an article on our website called The Advantages of the Incumbent Vendor. And in fact, if you send me an email at pcohan@greatdemo.com, I'll send you that article. You don't even have to go to the website. But that's what you're battling, is that huge alignment of resources, experience, mutualism that's taken place.
Yeah.
So in your particular example, if they simply are asking for a number, they're using you as a negotiation lever.
Exactly. Here's a question from Will. Are there effective ways to purposely spark an objective from a client in order to have them ask questions. Would this be a worthwhile way to create a dialogue rather than an interrogation?
So let me see. I'm reading that also as
Yeah,
well. There are
yeah.
effective ways to purposely spark an objective from a client or ask them to ask a question. Um, Will, would you unmute and ask this slightly differently? I don't think I understand what you mean in that first sentence.
Hey Peter, apology.
Yeah.
It was a typo. I didn't mean to put objective, rather objection.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps. So like a way to kind of like infer or like prepare for an objection, and in that way, instead of being more of an interrogation, they've kind of created their own dialogue, whether emotionally or through their own interest.
Yeah. One of the rationales of using a vision generation demo is that when you're offering that situation slide saying, here's how other companies that are potentially similar to you have addressed challenges that might be similar to you, you can ask, how does this compare with your situation? And that actually sparks the conversation in a very, very fruitful way. They say, well, yeah, as a head of sales, I've got to make my numbers. We're not using Excel, we're using something else. And so they'll begin a conversation which then enables you to map to this. The objections start portion of this, I have a slightly different philosophy, and that is that my objective is to avoid objections, not seek to overcome them, but to proact. To proact to avoid objections. So, for example, and there's another article on our website called something to the effect of why many objections shouldn't need to be addressed. And it basically says things like, well, if they come to you and say, you don't understand our business, that probably means one of two things. Either you're unaligned with their marketplace and their vocabulary and their processes. It would be like somebody trying to go to a pharma research house that doesn't understand pharmaceutical research. It's just, you don't understand our business. Or similarly, you haven't done sufficient discovery to really be allowed to propose a solution. Like Ken with the first doctor said, yeah, everybody's got the flu. Well, you know what? Everybody uses our product, so you should use it too. You don't understand our business. You don't understand my specific situation.
Right.
So, Will, I don't think that addresses your question directly, but maybe it gives you some ideas.
Yes.
Thank you. And Peter, can you put your initial slide on, or how do people get in contact with Peter Cohan?
That is a good question. I don't know how people ever get in contact with me. Here we go.
Okay, here we go.
Here's the contact information at the bottom right. Thanks for that. I forgot all about that. Got excited about the questions.
But yeah, I think we're about ready to wrap it up. But if anyone has any other last thoughts there, one question from Luis before we wrap up. I was just trying to see if anyone else had any thoughts about that funnel early on and that lead churn. Like you said, I think we're at Luis's company. He sells many different lines and many different products, kind of works for kind of a distributor type of scenario and different technical, mechanical and industrial products. But so sometimes he feels like he's losing the company, and him in particular, they're losing leads because, well, maybe it didn't really work for one of their lines that they're selling, but then they don't have a chance if the lead churns and it goes away. Then Luis doesn't have a chance to try to see if there's something else that he could help them with.
That's a challenging one. I would need to know more about Luis's specific situation, products, and marketplace, be able to offer some reasonable solutions. The world of software, there are generally pretty good alignment in terms of the offerings that you have if you have multiple offerings. When you're selling physical products, it could be a very, very diverse set, from electronic materials to, I don't know, building materials. Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, at the bottom, I guess I do have one small tip. Bottom line, you need to be satisfying your prospect as often as you possibly can, even if it's when you say, no, we don't have that. So, for example, you may need to say, we don't have that, but let me recommend somebody that does, and we're really, really comfortable with them. you've now provided value because they can see you as a trusted advisor. And they'll come back to you even if they don't buy anything from you the first time or the second time. So I think it's Lewis. Lewis, I hope that helps.
Yeah. And thank you, Peter. Last question, then we'll wrap it up. Jeremy is asking about your book, Peter, Doing Discovery. He says, before jumping into doing discovery for the first time, a first read, what's your favorite chapter? What should be the one chapter he goes to if he doesn't have time to read anything else?
You don't have time to read anything else?
Well, come on, we're all
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to think. I would start on page 34, assess your discovery skills, because once you've done that and done it in an honest way, it will cause you to read the rest of the book.
There you go. Good sales pitch there, Peter. On that note, I think we're going to wrap it up. I appreciate Peter for coming and agreeing to do this with NAASE. Hopefully this provided some practical insight for the rest of you. And if you'd like a recording of this, please email us and we'll provide it to you. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the afternoon. Thanks
Peter. A lot, folks. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Luis. Bye-bye.